Composition is one of the pillars of photography. By choosing your composition, you are telling the audience where you want them to look within your picture. If you imagine the proscenium arch of a theatre, if you think of composition, you are able to take that arch and move it to wherever you want to tell your story. When thinking about composition, there's a sort of very famous rule of thirds that, you learn at art school. You can look at the great Impressionist painters, and what you see is there's basically, if you think of a frame, there's a grid cut into thirds. And it just so happens that in many of the great photos and paintings of the world, that if you put that grid of thirds over the picture, it just so happens that many of the best focal points happen to just naturally land at thirds. And often I'm surprised when I do it, and literally the eye that you look at is precisely at the meeting of this third, and there's the eye. It's surprising how accurate this rule is. Now, I also massively believe rules are for breaking, so I'm not saying that you have to live your photographic life by those rules. And indeed, there's another element to this, which is when you put people bang in the middle, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the rule of thirds, when you are starting to think about composition, is incredibly useful. And I carry it with me every day in my brain, and then I make my own decisions when I want to break that rule. Centre point perspective is where you very much lead the eye bang into the middle of the frame. And I suppose the sort of modern cinema's genius of centre point perspective for me is undoubtedly Stanley Kubrick. And so many of his films, if you think of something like The Shining with the little boy riding his tricycle down the hallways, he's bang in the centre. When the lift's open with the blood, it's bang in the centre. Kubrick framed so much of the film with your eyes going whoom. And it's wonderful if you're especially if you're in a city with sort of skyscrapers. You're in New York City and you look down one of the avenues, and I've taken quite a lot of pictures. I feel when people are crossing roads and you get them in the middle of the road as they're walking, and the street and everything is all pointing you bang into the centre of the frame, and it just guides the eye straight in there. I suppose one of the most fundamentally, I say photographic, but it goes way back to the painters, is perspective and vanishing points. And I take a lot of my pictures with 28mm lens on my professional camera, which is not far off the lens you may get on an iPhone. When it's on standard. And I love using vanishing points. So, you might have a brick wall and you follow that brick wall all the way down, but there's also a road going all the way down here. Maybe there's an arrow on the road pointing. Maybe there are buildings, and they're all following this vanishing point. It could be to a centre point perspective, or it could be off to one side or the other. And then you place the action within that. But because your eye's doing this, if you then have someone, say, running towards you, coming in this way, you get this wonderful sort of visual energy in the image. You just see so much going on, and it feels so sort of vibrant and alive. And these are all things that we can use within our toolbox to help bring composition to a photo of a person. There's a picture I did of Anthony Joshua where he's running towards me, and he's boxing towards me, and he's banging that centre. It's a really dynamic way of composing. So just because I'm aware of the vanishing point, let's say we're at a railway station, you've got the lines of a railway track, you've got an idea of having someone within it where they may be framed, their heads framed by the tracks going back behind them. You could get really stuck into that and just try and take that picture, and you may not notice they're actually doing something so much more interesting by breaking those lines. So, it goes back to everything. There are no rules. I can show you a number of pictures where I've stuck someone completely off in one corner or place them on the bottom. I mean, these rules are completely for breaking. if you were to go off and try some practical examples yourself of this, why don't you look for vanishing points in your environment? You know, it might be that you work in a ginormous office, in which case you've got the vanishing points of all the desks and the lights overhead. Maybe you're at a train station because you're commuting to work. You know, maybe you're at school and you're looking down the line of a football pitch or something like that. And think about seeing the vanishing point and that perspective in an image, and then bringing a subject, could be, you know, a friend, a pet, whatever the hell it is, and put them into that picture and find interesting ways of using the vanishing point to frame your subject. Experiment with the thirds rule and try, as well as putting people down this third, that third, that third, or that third, also look at putting them in those third corners and just see what it does to the picture and see how much it changes when you move off 10 degrees, take the same picture. And then when you've done that, try something else that sort of messes with that breaks that rule a bit, and see which picture you prefer.